Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass. The other day I received a message on Facebook that asked me to check out a video on YouTube about a man talking about the Trinity. And I checked it out, and I was profoundly disappointed by it. In fact, it kind of got me worked up, and that's how I do my best podcast, I think, is when I get worked up. So I thought I would do a little podcast. Instead of making it sound really nice and pretty, which I know you would appreciate, I'm just going to play this on YouTube and pause it here and there and make some reflections upon it. This video is called FAQ, frequently asked questions, FAQ- is Yeshua, Jesus, God? And apparently the company or organization is called Passion for Truth Ministries. So I'm glad they're passionate for truth. That's really good. Okay, this is the video, and I'm going to play some snippets of it. They ask a man a question, is Yeshua God?
Is Yeshua indeed Father Yahweh? That question could slide into quite a few different theological questions that are related to that. It is probably one of the most misunderstood theologies or doctrines in the Hebrew roots movement.
Now, the Hebrew roots movement obviously is, I don't know that much about it. I know enough about it to know that it is a somewhat of a movement or resurgence amongst particularly Gentile people trying to get back to what they consider to be their Jewish roots of Christianity. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The only problem is, of course, is when they start using that motivation to misunderstand the New Testament message. So let's listen in.
Okay, is because many of us come out of religious denominations that espouse a concept called the Trinity, of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are separate yet distinct persons.
Okay, right there. We don't come out of different denominations and believe in the Trinity. It is the Christian doctrine of Trinity. There are three major branches of Christianity: Roman Catholicism, Orthodox, or you might say Eastern Orthodox, and Protestant. Anglicanism might be a fourth branch, but it's kind of sort of a Protestant version. It's a in-between. But we'll say three major branches. All branches of Christianity assume Trinity is solid, foundational theology. It is the bedrock. In fact, if you don't believe in Trinity, all three branches would concur. If you don't have a proper understanding of Trinity, you are not Orthodox. You are not part of historic Christianity.
And it's called a mystery. As a former Christian apologist, I could go through that and show you where even history, where that theology kind of came together.
Now that's a telltale sign. As a former Christian, let's keep listening.
And I've gone full circle on that. And so in 30 seconds...
That makes me scared. I don't know what it means to go full circle. Full circle means you come back around where you started. So if he was a Christian, that means he should have held to the belief that God is Trinity. If he's come back, it means he still should view God as Trinity. But as you'll see, at least in my view, in this video, he has no proper understanding of Trinity.
I'm going to give you the short answer. Yeshua is absolutely Yahweh in the flesh. No questions asked. There was a time where...
Yeshua is the Aramaic word, and from Hebrew too. Yeshua is Jesus' name. Yeshua means Yahweh saves. Yeshua means Yahweh saves. And so growing up, Jesus' friends didn't call him Jesus. They called him Yeshua. The word Jesus is his name too. I've met so many people who think that we're doing some sinful thing by calling him Jesus instead of Yeshua. No, it's just language. Iesu is the Greek way of saying Yeshua. Yeshua, or Jesus, has multiple names in multiple languages. So Aramaic and Hebrew, it's Yeshua. If you were to do the transliteration from Yeshua to English, it would be Joshua. That's where the word Joshua comes from, Yeshua. But the Greek way of saying it is Iesus, and that's where we get the word Jesus from. So it means the same thing. So Yeshua is the way a lot of people like to make it sound very Jewish. Well, that's fine. But it's just different language. You could call him Jesus and say you're speaking Spanish. You're referring to the same person. Secondly, the word Yahweh in the Old Testament refers to what Jews would call God the Father. God the Father. In Christian Orthodoxy, Yahweh typically refers to God the Father. Yahweh is sometimes used to refer to the whole Trinitarian God, but typically Yahweh refers to, we might call God the Father. So he's saying, he just said Yeshua is Yahweh in the flesh. That means he believes that Jesus, in his earthly ministry, was Yahweh, or God the Father, in the flesh. Now, that's absolutely false. But let's listen to what he says.
Where I question that, rightfully so, because anything that has Catholic roots needs to be questioned.
Okay, right there. Anything with Catholic roots. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at him. I'm laughing how silly it is. I'm not laughing at him. I'm sure he's a wonderful guy. I'm just laughing because it's funny to me. It is. So sorry if you just think I'm such a meanie head and I'm a punk. But it was not Catholic. It's not Catholic. Trinity is not a Roman Catholic doctrine. It's a Christian doctrine. The doctrine of Trinity, one God with three equal persons, existed and came to be developed centuries before there was a Roman Catholic church. So it is not a Roman Catholic doctrine. It is a church doctrine. And that's it. So already he's already mistaken, and I just make sure you're not mistaken in the same way.
Okay, because you're going back, that's not picking on Catholicism, it's picking on the ancient forefathers that were Gentile and hated the Jewish people.
Ancient church fathers were not Roman Catholic for the first several centuries. Roman Catholicism as a major system of belief, you might say an organization, didn't exist really until the Roman Empire fell. Really it didn't, not until it really gained its ascendancy into power. Because in the Germanic tribes, people like Alaric in 410, when he sacked Rome, Rome got sacked a few times. But when that was in disarray, the Romans, who were Christians, took over. And they began to teach these Germanic tribes how to speak Latin. And they taught them how to do it by using the Vulgate, or the Latin translation of the Bible. And it's in this period, late 4th and early 5th onward centuries, that Roman Catholicism really took hold and become a powerhouse. Now, Rome was a powerful center or capital of Christianity for the first few centuries, no doubt about it. But it was not a massive unit together that had sway over all kinds of parts of the Roman Empire. It's just not true. The church just was not that united. It just wasn't that united. So there was not Roman Catholicism while the Trinity developed. In fact, most Trinitarian development came from what we now call the Eastern Orthodox Church. That is in Asia Minor. Greek speakers, not Latin speakers. Latin speakers had a lot to do with it, but really only Augustine, who was a Latin speaker in the West. But it's the Eastern Church Fathers who are the primary developers the articulators of Trinitarian theology. Gregory of Nazianzus, Gregory of Nyssa, and so forth. But that's not to say the Western world wasn't part of the process. Of course they were. But this guy's just wrong. It is not a Roman Catholic doctrine. The church did not develop Roman Catholicism. Secondly, they did not all hate the Jews. It is true that in general, the early church fathers did not think favorably about the Jews. That's true in general. But they did not develop Trinity just to spite the Jews. So their anti-Semitism that is apparent in people like John Chrysostom and other places, it is apparent, but their apparent anti-Semitism is not the cause of the development of the Trinity. Let's keep listening.
So that's a big red flag. So as I went back and began to look at this and look at the Tanakh.
The Tanakh is what the Jews call, what we call the Old Testament. And that's because TNK, Tanakh, TNK stands for Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then the N stands for the Navaim, that means the prophets. And then the K is the Ketuvim, that means the writings. It's 3 major divisions of what we call the Old Testament. And Jews don't call it Old Testament, they call it the Tanakh. So you might say the Hebrew Bible.
Yeshua is using the same characteristics that Yahweh says only I have. Everything from judge to divinity, everything from I will not share my glory with another, yet Yeshua says I am glorified with the Father, so on and so forth.
That's exactly right. There are numerous times in the New Testament where, particularly in John's Gospel, and then with the early church writers in the New Testament, suggest that the way to understand the fact that Jesus is God-kind, deity, you might say, is that he shares in aspects and features of Yahweh. That's true. But it is not true, therefore, that they thought Yahweh was Jesus or Jesus was Yahweh. That's a false inference. And the early church fathers are very adamant about this point. So when Jesus talks about roles and functions that he has that only relate to Yahweh, it does not mean Jesus thinks he's God the Father, nor does it mean that his audience would have thought Jesus was God the Father. They would not have thought that. They would have thought that he was God's or Yahweh's emissary. He shared in Yahweh's authority to forgive sins and do other things. So to repeat, the early church fathers understood this, and so do the authors of the New Testament. Just because Jesus shared in some of the divine attributes does not mean he is Yahweh. It does not mean that at all.
Yeshua is the right arm of Yahweh. So if you have a right arm, which hopefully you do, if you have a right arm, is it part of your body? It's the same blood is flowing through your veins that's flowing into your brain, but your arm is not all of the body, yet it is fully connected to the body, no different than a branch is connected to the tree. And so where the confusion comes in is that Yeshua, before he came to earth, was in the form of the Devar, the Word of Yahweh made flesh that John 1:1 is talking about, okay? When he came, when Yeshua was born in the flesh, a creation was born. He took on mankind.
Okay, I got to stop there for a second because there's many things going on. The analogy of an arm being connected to a person, sharing the same blood, I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt. If his point is they both share the same deity, that's fine. The problem with the analogy is it's one body. And that's precisely, of course, what he believes, but this is where he's not presenting Trinity whatsoever, and he's not presenting the Christian worldview or the New Testament view. Jesus, or Yeshua, that's fine with me, Yeshua is not just part of Yahweh's body. I'm not sure exactly what his analogy is trying to convey. The idea that Jesus is at his right hand, maybe his right arm in that sense, his right hand, if that's what he's trying to get at, the number one illusion or understanding of Jesus' divinity, we'll call it divinity. The Bible does not call it that. Divinity is a Latin word, divinitas, meaning of God, or deity is the Greek way of saying it, of God. Divinity, deity mean the exact same thing. Godness, God-kind. So the New Testament doesn't say, here's why he is deity, here's where he's divine. But if you might say it that way, the number one way the early Christians like to associate Jesus with, as Richard Bauckham calls it, the identity of God, is by quoting or alluding to Psalm 110:1, where it says, "My Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand." To sit at right hand when you're the monarch, the king, means you rule with the king over the kingdom. So the number one way the early Christians, according to the New Testament, like to talk about Jesus reigning with God is by alluding to Psalm 110:1, where he says, sit at my right hand. So I'm not sure if that's what he's trying to get at. If that's what he's trying to get out, fine, but it doesn't mean they're the exact same person.
The cloaked in humanity. By default, the word cloaked means there's something there that you can't see, and that is the word of Yahweh that created the entire universe. Everything was created for him and by him.
So confusing there too. When he said he was, just a second ago too, that he was created, that was consistently, overwhelmingly, constantly banned from all the councils and all the creeds. They, across the board, across the branches, you might say, the versions of Christianity, they all concurred that you must not say Jesus was created, because that means Jesus is a creature. Now, they would go to texts like Proverbs 8, which says that wisdom was created, but they would say that was an incarnation. But the divine word, or he liked to say dabar in Hebrew, but I'm not sure, I guess he's just trying to be extra Jewish. John chapter 1 says, and the word became flesh. John is in Greek, not Hebrew, and it says the logos. So that's fine. God's word, his wisdom, became flesh. That does not mean he was created. It means the logos, or the word, took on flesh. It took on flesh. So it assumed a human body. So it's a divine or God soul, you might say, with a human flesh, human body.
So this is why there is a apparent separation between Yeshua the Messiah and Yahweh, is because there is a creature, if I could say that word, or a human.
And that's what's scary. I mean, I understand his point, but you don't want to say he's a creature. I mean, the early church fathers for centuries were adamant on this point. You must not say Jesus is a creature because you've misunderstood the New Testament. The New Testament makes it very clear that he's not just a creature. You don't worship creatures. You don't ever worship creatures, no matter how special they are, ever. Jews were adamant on this point, and the earliest Christians were Jews. You do not worship creatures. You only worship Creator. That's it. And only God creates. So when they tried to put Jesus into the divine identity, they were adamant that Jesus did not create. He was the means through which God the Father created. Read 1 Corinthians 8:6. Read Colossians. It's all over the place. So they were both part of the divine creation. They were both part there. It wasn't just Yahweh. They deliberately put Jesus, or Yeshua, as part of the creating process. But he was not a creature, because you don't worship creatures, and creatures don't save anyone. They don't save anybody. Only God saves people. So that's why Christians should not use the term creature for Jesus.
That is forming the role of high priest right now until when? Until the 1,000-year millennial reign of the Messiah is finished. What happens at that point?
Whoa, okay. The millennial reign, that's a big issue too. I'm not going to go into all that right now. That's from one reference in the entire Bible. It's from Revelation. And I don't know why he thinks that the millennium in Revelation has to do with right now. In Revelation, that millennium is in the future. It's not right now. Now, in Paul's writing, like in 1 Corinthians, Paul assumes we are in the Messianic kingdom right now, but he has no time limit. So Paul's view is that Jesus is reigning right now. I think this man has just joined these two concepts. I think he's joined a Messianic kingdom and added the concept of 1,000 years. But my question is, when did that start? When did it start? People who think the 1,000-year reign is a literal 1,000-year reign, and secondly, those who think it's already started, always pick different dates just to make sure it doesn't look stupid. So if you say, well, it started when Jesus was resurrected, well, that was 2,000 years ago, so that didn't work out. So at what time did this 1,000-year reign start? He doesn't answer that. He just assumes it, and that's bothersome.
He gives up his authority back to Yahweh so that God can be all in all. I believe that's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Okay.
No, it's not. 1 Corinthians... No, Jesus does not give up his authority. The New Testament authors are adamant on this point. He does not give up his authority. Now, I guess you don't have to trust me, but I'm asking you to trust me. Go read the New Testament carefully. It is throughout books. It is that throughout Revelation that the Lamb shares the throne with God the Father. He shares the throne. Jesus thinks he's the Son of Man figure in Daniel 7. In Daniel 7:14, the one like of Son of Man will reign with the Ancient of Days, that's God the Father. He will reign with him. Reign with him. He's not God the Father. He will reign with him. That's in Daniel 7:14. He will reign forever and there will be no end. So what he just said is complete fairy tale. The New Testament is adamant on this point. Even Jesus thought his authority and his rule and kingdom would have no end. Even he thought that because he thought he was the Son of Man figure in Daniel 7. So what he just said is profoundly wrong. I need to make sure if you're a Christian, listen to this. Well, I guess especially if you're not a Christian, you need to understand that the resurrected Jesus rules and reigns, and that will not stop. He will never, ever give that authority back because it's his. He's not a creature. Secondly, he assumes what we call, and this is one of the versions of a Jewish kind of movement early on called the Ebionites. We have some reference to them in the 4th century, 3rd and 4th century. These were apparently Jews who thought Jesus was adopted as God's son at his baptism, and that God the Father conferred upon him certain special status, and then he took it away, and most of them thought he took it away when he died. And then that's it. He'd go back to the heavenly realm. Well, maybe that's what this guy thinks too, that Jesus was adopted by God the Father. That too is heresy. That is not Christian at all. Jesus was not adopted by God the Father. He was not given a special privilege. He's not just a Superman creature. He is God the Word, God the Son, who then took on flesh. So what he just said is mistaken on two levels.
Okay, and so there is a definite mystical relationship between Yahweh, who is a spirit, because it says God is wind, God is Ruach, God is spirit, but he manifests himself in the form of his Son because he's pure light, so he cloaks his pure light in the form of his Son.
Okay, well, there's a bunch of metaphors and analogies there. It is true in the Old Testament, God is oftentimes called Ruach, okay, his breath, his wind. But if you'll read very carefully in the Old Testament, they'd speak as if these two were distinctions. There is God the Father, or Yahweh, and God's Ruach, God's Spirit. They are closely related, and sometimes they're interchangeable. But if you'll notice carefully, God's Spirit gets personified, kind of takes on a particular role of its own. God's Spirit is hovering over the waters of the deep in Genesis 1. God is not hovering, God's Spirit. That is to say, they talk about God's function as creation through his spirit or breath. Secondly, he says God is all light, and he kind of puts on a veil and gets all dark for Jesus. Well, okay, right, sure, but that doesn't mean Jesus is dark-skinned. It doesn't mean that he's captured God the Father's light, and now he's like a flashlight that's been covered up. But maybe he's trying to get analogies, but I'm not following with him.
Takes on flesh, and that flesh then has its own personality, its own soul, its own nefesh that is fully submitted.
Whoa, okay, to take on its own soul, own nefesh. Nefesh, the Hebrew word nefesh means a living being. Living being. Now this is very debated in scholarship. There are scholars who think nefesh just means living being and that's it, and they hate the word soul, and they said you're just a Greek Platonist. You follow Plato if you believe in a soul. That's one view, and they think that Hebrews did not understand soul, you were just a being. And then the other side of people said, no, there is a soul and body, but it's not I guess one extreme is that there are extreme dualities. Soul and maybe even spirit and mind and body are all very hardcore distinctions. A lot of Christians are that way, and that's false too. That's not Christian. The average, I would suggest, and maybe that's a different podcast, the Christian view, and Jews held this view too, is somewhat of a moderate dualism. They did believe in a living being called nefesh, but they believe there's something called flesh too. So there's skin and body, and then there's a living part of you. The living part of you got there by God. So the Jewish conception is that God breathed into a person and made a person alive. And when his ruach, his breath, kind of gets stuck inside a body, it's called a nefesh. So you're alive, metaphorically speaking, you might say, you're alive because God breathed into you. That's where life comes from. But the reason why in Christianity we do not say that Jesus was created, he's different, he has a soul, he has his own whatever, like he's saying, is because that implies and assumes that Jesus is a creature. He's not a creature. God the Father did not create his soul. You might say it this way, because this is standard Christian theology, and it's not the only way to think about it, but it's a standard view, that the divine, one more time, that the divine word, God's wisdom, that personified aspect of himself, of his spoken agency, his word, took on flesh. So to say it this way, maybe to make it a little more Gentile-ish, since he likes that word too, I guess, is that Jesus' soul was God the Word. God was divine. His soul was not created. But the body was part of nature like everyone else's body. So what he just said is called adoptionism, that Jesus is a creature and that he had a special role, but that is not the Christian worldview.
To his Father, just like he says, I fully submitted his will, which made him perfect in every way. But at the end of the 1,000 years, Yeshua will be no more. He will give up his authority, meaning that I believe that the cloak will fully be released, and the light will immediately go back to the Father, and he will go back into the form of which he came before he came on planet Earth, and that was the Devar.
Devar means the word. That's absolutely wrong. Every word he just said, besides, English language is fine, but everything he just said is wrong. That's not what Jesus is going to do. He will not return back to the Father like that. He is not a drop of water to go back into the ocean. That is not what's going to happen whatsoever. Right now, the resurrected Jesus is alive and well, and he is body and soul combined. He has a brand new resurrected body. He doesn't give up the resurrected body. He is a resurrected person of the Trinity. So he's distinct from God the Father in that way, yes. But his soul is not a different being. So God the Son took on flesh, and then when he was crucified and got a new resurrected body, he holds on to it. That's the deal. He won't give that light back. He won't give his body back like it's a costume. That's the way God the Son is now. The resurrected Jesus is and will be that way, as far as we know, forever.
Put in a visual, if you go outside in the wintertime, take a deep breath. Here comes your word. You see your breath. At the end of the 1,000 years, he will absorb his word back into who he is. How do you describe?
Again, I just have no idea where he gets this idea from, so I can't critique the idea. I can't critique the source. I've never heard this in my entire life, besides only in heresies. That is this oneness theology. Sometimes certain Pentecostals are called oneness Pentecostals. They might suggest something like this. In the early church, this was called monarchianism or Sabellianism. That is, that the Son and the Father are the same person and same being. Again, that was deemed a heresy over and over and over because that did not treat fairly what the New Testament authors were actually saying.
What that warm breath is and how it's the same but different than where it came. These are infinite concepts, and I only use less than 2% of my brain to begin with. There's no way for us to take a finite creature human being and understand a God that says he is infinite in every direction.
A finite creature human being and infinite in every direction. There again, that's the assumption he has, is that Jesus is just merely a human being. He was not merely a human being. He was what they call the God-man. Secondly, because you use so little of your brain, doesn't mean you have to have bad theology. If he would understand Trinitarian theology well, even a little bit better, you can understand it. And I'm going to wrap up here in just a second.
So I defer to the scriptures, definitely say that there is a connection between Yahweh and Yahweh Sevaot, which is Yeshua. They're no doubt, in my opinion, both one and the same. And the best analogy I can give is you have a computer tower, all the information, no way to get to it. Give us a monitor, we can know what's inside the tower. Yeshua is the monitor, Yahweh is the tower. At the end of the day, the tower's removed, we go inside the tower, and we get to see it for ourselves. So if you disagree with me, that's okay. All right? Hopefully that maybe helps a little bit.
Cool, because I do disagree, and I understand the computer analogy, and I kind of like that one. The fact is, if you want to get to understand what's inside the tower, you have to have access to that. Well, that's fine. We have access to God the Father through Jesus the Son. That's fine. Yeah, sure. But it's not true that he's the only access. God the Father revealed himself in various ways throughout the Old Testament. We understand God the Father's character for sure. We understand it fully by what Jesus did and who he is and what he's still doing now via the Spirit. So if at minimum, or maybe hopefully at most, his analogy is that when you see Jesus, you understand God the Father, that's fine. But that's not what he means. What he means is when you see Jesus, you really just see Yahweh. You really just see him. It's like he wears a mask and he goes back and gets swallowed back up into heaven and loses his light and his costume of the body is taken away and so forth. And that's why his analogy breaks down completely, because he has bad theology. Let me say this last thing and I'll wrap up. Maybe I ought to do a podcast on Trinity. But the typical Orthodox Christian view of Trinity is that there is one God. Early Christians were adamant on this point. Christians are monotheists. We believe that only one God exists, and we worship only one God. One stinking God. Not three gods. Muslims will accuse us of that. Oh, you worship three gods. You worship polytheist. And we really worship one God. No, one God. We worship one God who has three, and this is where all the controversy comes in. How do we describe the threeness? And I'm not going to go into detail right now because I'm out of time. But what I want to say is what the church eventually said was there are three persons, three persona from Latin. And there are different ways of understanding the Trinity, but this is at its core. One being, three persons. One being, three persons. Now, the early church did not develop the doctrine of Trinity just to make it confusing. And not because they hated Jews. Not because they hated anybody. They genuinely were trying to come with grips with the Christ event. What do we do with this guy who acts like and talks like he's part of God's very identity? He assumes to forgive sins. And God the Father raised him from the dead. And he's the Son of Man figure. He is the reigning Lord. We don't worship creatures. We only worship God. And they were putting all these pieces together. And very, very stinking early, because of Jesus' own teachings, they concluded that he was not just a creature, not just a human being. This is called Christology, how to understand, we might call the divinity of Jesus and his role and the Godhead. So the early Christians were forced to develop the Trinity because of their experience, because of history, not because they were just a bunch of pagans or Gentiles or hated the Jews. They were Jews. They were Jews who wrote the New Testament. And they came to grips with Trinitarian beliefs early on. Now, technically speaking, in scholarship, when we use the word Trinity, we mean something technical. So the technical definition of Trinity and that usage of Trinity is not in the Bible because a fully orbed understanding of it didn't really take place until the 3rd and 4th centuries. Now, today, theologians still debate and discuss how to fully understand Trinity. They still do. That's fine. But they all concur. They will all concur. It is one being, one God that Christians worship, best understood through 3 equally loving and willed personalities. Or you might say, centers of consciousness. I want to stop there. Before you listen to things on YouTube, well, you can listen to anything you want on YouTube. You're an adult. You can go for it. I just really encourage you not to take it all for granted just in case. And I really, really appreciate what my friend did when she reached out to me and said, hey, I like this. I think this. What do you think about it? I love the fact that she's, looking on YouTube to look up things about Trinity. That's outstanding. And I've already sent her a while back several links. And you can go to my blog, davidpendergrass.com. I've got a blog from several months ago where I have resources on the Trinity. I've got several links that will send you to about 4 or 5 different essays that you can read I think are very good introductions to this concept. So I'm so glad my friend was looking out and trying to think about Trinity. 2, I'm so glad that she reached out to me to say, hey, does this sound right? That's the way to do it. God bless you. In the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. davidpendergrass.com. If you look at the top, you'll see various tabs that have sermons I've preached, a link to all the podcasts I've done so far, a link to my consulting website. For more information about my consulting, see davidpendergrassconsulting.com. Also, you'll see information about the books I've written that are found on amazon.com. So davidpendergrass.com, one-stop shop, all that you need. If you want to reach out to me, follow me on Twitter at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, and send me a message. I'll see you online.